Two girls, the impossible and the immortal, were once moments away from their separate finales. Now they find themselves together with a little more extra time and space.
Clara and Ashildr return to Earth. They attempt to land near the Doctor's Tardis. Not being that competent in flying theirs at this moment in time, no pun intended, they end up in Nevada. Also, Clara tries to get as close to her death date as possible, but arrives 3 months and 9 hours late, making it around 22:45 hours GMT or 14:45 PDT/PST locally in Nevada. Clorilda's Tardis's chameleon circuit disguises the ship as a cactus. They debate whether to leave and materialise in London, but Clara ultimately decides they should leave the Doctor where they find themselves, lest he wake up any moment from his memory wipe, which could lead to negative, unknown and/or potentially dangerous repercussions if such a thing occurred. Finding themselves where they've landed, the middle of a desert, they walk for a short distance carrying the Doctor and find a road. They lay the now stirring Doctor on the ground as comfortably as they can and flag down a passing vehicle. They leave the Doctor with the man who was driving, hoping him to be trustworthy. He seems it. Clara asks of him,
Take care of him. He may be sad when he wakes up.
Preparing to leave the Doctor behind, taking one final look, Clara emotionally says her goodbyes and cries in the process. She and Ashildr walk back to their TARDIS after thanking the man. Ashildr asks Clara if she is okay, to which the latter bravely replies that she is. She wipes her eyes, but realises that the tears she was recently crying are dried up. Taking their TARDIS, they discuss the fact that they need to acquire the Doctor's and attempt to bring it to him. Even though she's had some experience with controlling a TARDIS, Clara is effectively learning as she goes along. She has had difficulty dematerialising due to the console's classic layout, and hence why they flew in the first place. Therefore, keeping with the flying for the time being, they head east into Utah. Below, they see settlements, towns, and, also briefly, an isolated diner. Clara quips that they need to get the hang of their TARDIS's dematerialising controls quickly, before they become
A UFO sighting of a flying cactus.
Eventually, after much fumbling about, and Ashildr giving the manual a quick skim, they do dematerialise and continue on their way to London. Clara, realising their classic TARDIS layout does have a telepathic interface, uses her recent memories and tries to land near where the Doctor's TARDIS is located, both in space and time. However, they end up closer to the trap street instead, as it is prominently on Clara's mind. The TARDIS materialises in an alleyway. Its chameleon circuit disguises it as a dumpster. Clara looks outside via the TARDIS's exterior camera screen and, looking at a map screen, can tell that they are not near the Doctor's TARDIS, but rather closer to Trap Street. She realises that she was distracted and preoccupied with thoughts of it. Looking at the controls, she knows that they are roughly at the time of her death, but can't be too sure if they have arrived before or after. Ashildr volunteers to go out and find the Doctor's TARDIS, as she undoubtedly has a clearer mind. Also, her reasoning includes the assurance that Clara wouldn't run into her younger self by accident if they have arrived before her death. Clara gives her a rough indication of where she believes the Doctor's TARDIS is in relation to their current location, an estate to the north of where they currently are. Ashildr asks what the Doctor's TARDIS looks like. Clara replies, with fondness,
A blue police box.
Clara then questions if the running into your younger self logic also applies to Ashildr herself, to which the latter cryptically replies that there are two scenarios in play.
One, we're before your death, so therefore I'm safely in the refuge. Or two, it's after, and I'm most likely far away from here by now.
Clara is taken aback by the vague words as Ashildr leaves while saying she
Won't be long.
Alone, Clara stands for a while before going to the Tardis's doors and opening one up slightly. Looking through the gap, she sees Ashildr just leaving the threshold of the alleyway and the busyness of the city making its way past. She closes the door and sits on the floor, resting up against the recently closed. She wonders what Ashildr meant by being most likely far away from here after her death. Ashildr, at the beginning of her police box acquiring quest, walks past Trap Street and takes a moment to reminisce about the place without entering. After recollections with mixed feelings, she continues in her search. After waiting for a while and no sign of Ashildr returning, Clara starts to become both worried and slightly suspicious. She opens up the door to her Tardis once more. This time, however, she ventures out into the alleyway, cautiously. She reaches the threshold of where the alleyway meets the main road and looks around at all the activity. She looks roughly to the area where Trap Street is located, about the 2 o'clock position from the alleyway's threshold, noting that her attention and gaze want to actively but fleetingly stray from the area due to the misdirection circuit. Clara looks across the road and at how close Trap Street is to where she now finds herself, roughly 40 or 50 yards. She chuckles while noting another mental observation. She went into Trap Street, faced the Raven, was extracted at the end of her time stream, ended up on Gallifrey, at the end of the universe's life, escaped in a stolen TARDIS, accidentally ended up in Nevada, and now found herself across the street from where she first started. She quips to herself,
God, talk about going the long way round.
She walks back into the alleyway and back to her TARDIS in an attempt to stave off the boredom of waiting for Ashildr to return. Some time passes and she idles back to the threshold once more. Looking out into the main road, she sees something she vehemently didn't want to. On the pavement on the opposite side, she catches sight of the Doctor, Rigsy, and her very, very slightly younger self, who has just met up with the previous 2 after running down the road a little with Rigsy's phone in her hand. She sees the said device drop and their gradual combined group realisation that they are standing right outside the Trap Street. Watching from the alleyway, tears start to form in Clara's eyes. She has a strong urge to run across the street and to stop the trio from going into the alien refuge, or to generally change the flow of the trio's story in some way. Not to rescue herself from her own fate, however, but to negate the Doctor's upcoming ordeal, so he doesn't have to make the personal 4.5 billion year sacrifice. With fondness, and realising that this may be the very final time that she'd see the Doctor, in his velvet, doctory jacket no less, she watches with continuing tears until he, Rigsy, and her past self are all well within Trap Street, making their way through the narrow opening. She walks away from the threshold and back into her TARDIS, despondent with the futility of it all. After some time, Ashildr finally returns. She enters their TARDIS, talking, but comes to find Clara initially absent. Down some corridors, she finds the Impossible Girl sitting on the floor, resting against the wall, looking at photos on her phone of her adventures with the Doctor. She is still crying. Ashildr goes to sit with her. After a brief silence, Clara, forcing an expression change, laughs and passes her phone to Ashildr.
Here, watch this.
Ashildr takes the phone and Clara touches the screen to play the queued up video. The corridor is filled with the sound of the Benny Hill theme, accompanied with the sound of panicking Maya, yelling in fear. Ashildr laughs, commenting that she somewhat recognises the place and some of the people that can be seen in the video. Clara nods with some sorrow, feeling a little saddened by Ashildr's loss of key memories. The Immortal has forgotten that she was in fact somewhat responsible for the contents of the video in the first place. Clara points out to her,
That was you. You won that day.
As Ashildr continues watching and laughing, she sees, out the corner of her eye, Clara discreetly checking her pulse. Ashildr is drawn away from the clip and frowns in sympathy to her. She points out to Clara that her vitals must start again soon, logically because it is a miracle that she's even still functioning. Clara remains silent. Her fingers still try to find a pulse. She stares into space before quietly muttering,
I was a teacher. But there's one thing I never learned myself. We were before the Maya in their ship, and I was acting all doctory, do you remember?
Ashildr shakes her head.
I never learned that I'm not the doctor.
Ashildr hands Clara her phone back and reminds her of what the doctor detailed to her before he passed out. The rules on how to be a good doctor. She also reminds Clara that the doctor wanted her to
smile for him.
Clara's expression does not change. More silence follows before it is broken by Ashildr, once again apologising for her death on Trap Street. Clara asks Ashildr if she saw it happen. The immortal replies that she didn't. The latter then gets the impression that the former wants to ask more questions, but is hesitant in doing so. During a new bout of silence, Ashildr draws the conversation in another direction. She states that she believes to have found the doctor's Tardis, as it had police public call box written upon its four top edges, and asks about a
St. John's ambulance emblem on the door.
As Ashildr continues describing what she found, Clara starts to smile, and it gradually grows in strength slightly. Ashildr finishes by stating that she tried to open the door, but ultimately couldn't. Clara asks where the doctor's Tardis is, and if there were
many people about.
Ashildr replies that there were, and that she was getting some funny looks from them. Clara stands up, still forlorn, and makes her way to the console room. She has a job to do, and is determined to power through and get the said job over with as quickly as possible. She tells Ashildr that they will go retrieve the ship at night to attract less attention. Clara flips some controls of their own TARDIS's console as Ashildr uses the telepathic interface to get them to their destination for retrieval. In the very early hours of the morning, and with Monday turning into Tuesday, there are very few people about. Clorilda's TARDIS is ready to materialise. Clara tries her best to accurately materialise around the doctor's. She fails a few times, causing horrible and
not good
sounds. Eventually, with Ashildr's assistance in flipping and holding certain controls, their TARDIS starts materialising around the doctor's, disguising itself as a small brick electrical substation, suitably in keeping with the nearby apartment buildings on the estate, as there are other substations sporadically littered around the area. Inside the console room, Clara and Ashildr watch the doctor's TARDIS start to fade into view. With waves of changing opacity, Clara genuinely smiles and all eventually comes to a rest. Ashildr tries to drum up some more joy in Clara by awkwardly letting out a little cheer and clap. Clara leaves the console and visibly checks the integrity of the doctor's TARDIS to make sure all is okay. When she gets to the front, however, she immediately stops and stares in awe. Ashildr looks at the frozen still Clara and inquires if everything is
okay.
Moving over to be by her side, she also sees what the impossible girl does. The whole front of the doctor's TARDIS has been decorated with graffitied, colourful flowers. The penultimate bottom right panel also bears a monochrome rendering of Clara herself. Ashildr is just as speechless as the depicted and points out that when she found it, it wasn't decorated in such a way. Clara can only say a single word, rather a single name.
Rixie.
Ashildr inquires as to what that word means, which irritates Clara. She simply replies, whilst going through the door of the doctor's TARDIS, that Rixie was the one she gave her life for. Clara, obviously miffed, enters the console room of the doctor's TARDIS, and it springs to life with light and sound. At the same time, Ashildr tries to apologise to Clara, and also tries to explain that it has been a very long time for her to remember details and names. It is, however, futile. Ultimately, the despondent girl is not listening. The door is left ajar, but the immortal doesn't step into the doctor's TARDIS, but rather waits at the door, unsure of how to proceed with the ongoing situation when concerning Clara's growing isolation. Walking across the short walkway between the door and the central console, Clara notices that on its dexter side, on top of the telepathic interface, is the doctor's burgundy velvet jacket. Clara smiles gently as she sees it, remembering her comments about it a few hours or so ago, from her perspective, in the cloisters of Gallifrey. Clara places her hand on the jacket and takes a moment of reflection. After, she goes to the right walkways and down to her bedroom to collect a few belongings she has on the Tardis, a hold-all bag with a few essentials and clothes, including her black leather jacket and the jumper she was wearing at the very beginning of her last day with the Doctor. Back on deck in the console room, with her hold-all on her left shoulder, Clara takes a moment to take in the sight of the great time and relative dimension in space one last time. Looking to her left, she notices that Ashildr has stepped foot into the ship, but is waiting patiently at the door, with a sympathetic smile. Struck with an idea, Clara grabs the Doctor's velvet jacket and walks up the stairs located at the back. To the right, she puts it on the freestanding coat stand located close to the railings. This, however, is not the main reason for her ascending the stairs. To her left is the chalkboard. It is blank, and a previously used chalk stick rests in the bottom groove. She smiles with building tears as she knows exactly what phrase to write, in big block letters in the relative centre of the board.
Run, you clever boy.
She takes a moment and continues below.
And thee a doctor.
Placing the chalk back, she moves the board to be positioned right in front of the stairs and backs down the aforementioned while looking at her parting presentation for the Doctor. She turns and, standing on the main deck, places her hand on the Tardis console for the final time and looks up at the columned time rotor and Gallifreyan-adorned discs at the top. She smiles and remembers the last words the Doctor had said to her and the words she'd said to the Doctor before that in the cloisters. After a final brief moment of contemplation, she says her last goodbye to the Doctor's Tardis.
I know we had our differences, but thank you for everything. And take care of him for me. He may be sad.
With an affectionate pat, she leaves the console and makes for the door. Ashildr smiles sympathetically again at Clara as their eyes meet. The latter smiles back. Ashildr leaves the door's threshold for Clara to turn there and take one last look at her previous second home, and remember the adventures she had, thanks to her, the ship's abilities. She leaves the Doctor's Tardis for the final time and slowly closes the door. Clara lies on her side, on a simple bed within Clorilda's Tardis. She is depressed. She practically went into the bowels of the ship and found the first bedroom-looking room she could and made it hers. She has been doing nothing but ruminating and has not said a word to Ashildr in such a long time. In between the bouts of pondering and self-loathing, she has been getting distracted by the absence of her heartbeat. In days gone by, she would have noticed when lying in bed the crunching sound of her ear physically pressing against the pillow and back due to her heartbeat. That, coupled with the gentle rock of her body she'd sometimes feel, as her pulse unwaveringly continued without conscious thought. Now, she noted, there was nothing. Even with her left hand under her left ear, there was no rumble of a torrent of blood. She could only hear the distant ambience of her Tardis. Now and then, however, she would hear booted footsteps approaching, which would halt at the bedroom's threshold before receding away like very irregular sea waves. They happened to approach again as Clara was in her fortified state. However, this time, they seemingly stopped closer than they had done before. Ashildr, being cautious, asks Clara how she's feeling, to which the latter gives no answer. She approaches the bed softly. Clara can feel her feet sink left slightly as her immortal companion sits upon the mattress end. Ashildr points out to her that if she'd rather be alone, then let her know, before casually mentioning that they need to get the Doctor's Tardis back to him at some point. She still gets no answer from Clara. She looks at the impossible girl's face and sees that she looks cried out, though her eyes are tearless and looking quite normal. Ashildr places a comforting hand on Clara's right sneakered foot before trying to humorously quip that she shouldn't wear shoes in bed, trying to elicit some kind of response from her. Clara, however, still stays silent, not even moving her eyes in the immortal's direction, let alone her head. She does, though, as her sympathetic companion stays with her, eventually speak.
4.5 billion years. He did what he did for 4.5 billion years. And I'm going to betray him of that because the universe requires me to do so.
Ashildr, being somewhat responsible for the Doctor being sent to the confession dial in the first place, states that she wishes she could undo everything. She adamantly states that she wishes she'd never made such a deal with the Time Lords. Clara very weakly chuckles and quips that they're both guilty of not having foresight. Ashildr removes her hand from Clara's foot before starting to rise up off the bed. Clara, though, quickly moves and grabs Ashildr's left arm by the jacket, surprising the immortal, prompting her not to leave and to resume being present. The latter places her comforting hand on the former's right foreleg. After a long passage of time, Ashildr eventually speaks up.
Clara,
She says softly.
I have a plan.
Clara closes her eyes and braces herself for what's to come. She has no idea what the next words will be. The immortal girl chirpily suggests that they should get some food. After a stint of silence, Ashildr continues with a slight laugh, explaining that she's starving and that both of them
Should get out of Tardis and get some food.
She also points out that
There's a whole time and space range to choose from.
for the first time in a long time, due to confusion, Clara sits up. Ashildr further explains that she didn't want to disturb her during her lamenting, but she has no idea how to fly their Tardis. Otherwise, she would have gotten some food herself and some for Clara if she wanted some. The latter, now feeling a little ashamed, asks how long she's been lying down for, and the answer she receives from Ashildr shocks her.
Just over a day.
With lethargy, Clara rises up more, which causes Ashildr to spring into action and make sure she doesn't fall or suffer any ill side effects. Her hands go up to her forearms, attempting to steady her. It comes to the immortal's mind, however, that the impossible girl would be, and was perfectly fine, due to her unique, time-breaking condition. She asks Clara if she has slept at all. She says she hasn't, to her recollection. Ashildr then asks her if she's hungry. She says she feels no different than she did on Trap Street. Clara begins to question if she can actually eat, due to her unique condition. She questions if the physical process of food entering her stomach could still happen, as every other day-to-day normal bodily function is absent from her existence. Ashildr, after taking a moment and thinking about how to formulate her question, asks Clara if she feels as though she can. The latter confirms that she does feel as such. Removing her hands from her forearms, Ashildr tells her that
It could be a fun experiment or test.
for her to undertake to see what would happen. She continues and details out a rudimentary plan.
We go get food and after drop the Doctor's Tardis off. Sound like a plan?
Clara is dubious as to the realistic function of her eating, but ultimately agrees. She even offers to pay for it on one of her credit cards. It's not like she'll have to pay the balance off. And, as a means of saying sorry to Ashildr
For moping around.
neglecting their normally functioning needs and effectively keeping her trapped on a supplyless TARDIS for over a day, she suggests they
Go to a fancy London restaurant